Three Staten Islanders have refused to let their disabilities define them, living out their artistic and athletic dreams while inspiring borough residents every step of the way.
I never thought that I'll be able to play soccer again. You really can't get better than this.
When I'm on stage, I talk about my life and my struggles. My goal is I'd love to travel the world and perform on large stages. I want to break into the business of TV and movies. I want to write my own television show about my life.
It affects you basically in every single way possible. In a weird way, this disease actually helped me for looking at life, I would say.
I think one common theme between Ahmed, Cole, and Ethan is that they tell me they're so blessed and grateful. It doesn't matter that Ahmed can't see, doesn't have a right arm, doesn't matter that Ethan and Cole are legally blind and can barely hear. They're so grateful for what they have, and they don't want to focus on what they lack, as they say. They want to focus on what comes after that and the things that they do have.
Welcome to the Staten Island Advances from the Scene, a podcast bringing you an inside look at the biggest stories on Staten Island with the reporters who cover them. I'm your host, Erik Bascome, and this week I'm joined by Staten Island Advance community news reporter Priya Shahi to discuss three borough residents who have overcome overwhelming adversity in pursuit of their lives' dreams. Thank you for joining me today, Priya. I'm so glad we were finally able to get you on the podcast. I know you're still relatively new to the company, so before we kind of get into some of the great reporting you've done, I was hoping you could just tell our listeners a little bit about yourself and how you got started here.
Hi, Eric. Thank you for having me here finally. I'm really excited to be here. I recently joined the company in April, and I believe I'm the youngest one here, which I think that's true.
That might be true, and that I've held that honor before, so.
I actually love being the youngest because I feel like everyone here is so experienced and they're so hardworking and they have a lot of resources that I can tap into. So it's been great being here with older people. I'm not calling people old, but my passion for journalism actually started very young. I came here when I was here, as in the United States, when I was 5 years old, and I came from Nepal. So moving to Queens, New York, where everyone is different than you and so diverse, it made me realize that I was very curious about other people's culture because I come from a very traditional background that's different. It made me realize I want to know everyone else's stories and then I want to tell it to other people. So there's just understanding of people are different, but it's okay because the more you learn about them, the more you realize it's interesting to be different.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that genuine curiosity is something that a lot of us journalists seem to have, and that's kind of what drives us, wanting to learn more about people, learn more about what's going on in the world, and then be able to share it with other people in a way that they can understand and that they can relate to. And I'm curious, being that you are originally from Nepal and then moved to Queens, what's it like being on Staten Island now? Because this is definitely, I'm sure, a bit of a change of pace from what you're accustomed, right?
I think Staten Island is diverse, but when you come from Queens, it's less. And I'm used to being around a lot of immigrants because I grew up with so many South Asians, so many East Asians that they're also first generation immigrants like I am. So being on Staten Island, I see a lot of families that have been here for generations. So they are definitely more Americanized and they just have a lot of family members here versus us where, we're the first people of our family to be here. So that's really different. And it's I like seeing the dichotomy and realizing what that means to build a life here for generations and then just build a community that's so close-knit on Staten Island.
Yeah, we really do, depending on where you are, but really throughout the borough have so many different, unique communities. I think a lot of people sometimes assume when you say Staten Island, you're oh, it's all the Italians and from the Jersey Shore, and you've got all the Irish people who, are in the FDNY and all that kind of stuff, which that really isn't the case. I mean, it is in certain situations, but it is a lot more diverse and a lot more like the rest of New York City than we might get credit for sometimes. So one other thing I wanted to touch on real quick before we get started is I know that you have been selected as part of this Advanced Local Syracuse University Fellowship Program, right?
Yes.
And so can you tell our listeners a little bit more about that and what that program is and how it's been going so far?
I think I'm just really excited to go back to school and get my master's in communications, and it's focusing on journalism innovation. And really, I'm just excited to learn again, get my brain working, being challenged, because I think it's important, especially when you're young, to continue to exercise your brain. So the program is really going to focus on how you can, as a journalist, stay on top of how technology is changing. So you can tell stories, but in different ways and different media platforms. And I think that's something as a journalist, as much as, you want to stick to writing and stick to photography and do your old style videos, people are changing. There's so many new apps coming out daily. People's attention spans are different. So it's important to stay on top of how to keep people's attention, but also stay true to your journalistic integrity. So I think that's what I'm the most excited about. And it's an 18-month program. So the way it works is I do this program for 18 months and then I stay with the company for 1 more year. Mm-hmm. Obviously, like everything I learn, I'm going to try and
put into practice here, right?
Put into practice here and try to do the best I can. And then from then on, we'll see where that goes.
Yeah, that's incredible. And so I think you really hit the nail on the head there, in that such an important part of it for new journalists and all journalists really right now is adapting to the technology and knowing how to kind of share your stories across different mediums. Like you said, I know that that's been a big point of emphasis here. When I got hired about 5-6 years ago at this point, one of the big things for the company was that not only could I write stories, but that I could also do photos, that I could do videos, that I could do social media, that we can do podcasts now as we've been doing. So it really is kind of gone are the days of just writing for the paper. Now, you write for a digital media company, or you work for a digital media company. You're a content creator. You're not really just a reporter in the way that you once were. But let's move on to the reason that I had you on today, and that's to talk about some of these really cool, inspiring features that you've been working on these past few months, I would say. So the first one I wanted to discuss is about Ahmed Sharif, a 25-year-old borough resident who's now realizing his dreams of being able to play soccer after losing his vision and his right arm in a bombing when he was just 7 years old. So I'm curious first kind of how you found out about this story and what made you think it was important for us to pursue.
First of all, thank you for finding it cool and inspiring.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, so the way I heard about Ahmed is actually through the communications manager for the U.S. Association of Blind Athletes. His name is Bill Kellick, and he was like, I have a player. He's from Staten Island, and if you want to put a spotlight on him, here's his information. They have a soccer camp for blind athletes every year. He's been coming to camp. He's very passionate about what we're doing here, and if you want to tell a story, let me know. And immediately my manager, Cassie, she emailed me and said, would you want to cover this? Because I think she just knew that because I went to Hungerford School and I was covering proms and graduations for this school that serves kids and students with disabilities, she was like, here, I think you would love to do this. And I took it up right away. And I learned so much. I feel like with Ahmed's story, there was just, at the surface, I was like, this is a guy who comes to camp and loves soccer and he's blind. And then we kept peeling back layers and layers and kept going back to get more footage of him. And it made me realize there's so much to uncover through even a tiny little pitch that you get.
Yeah, and can you start to kind of peel back some of those layers for us? Can we get a little deeper into the story and just tell us kind of what happened and when he was a child and how those kind of experiences led him to Staten Island through the work of one of the nonprofit organizations, right?
Yeah, it was through the work of Global Medical Relief Fund. Mm-hmm. Basically, this is what Ahmed told us, that he grew up in Baghdad, Iraq. In 2003, during the U.S. invasion of Iraq, around this time, he was just playing street soccer. He loved playing soccer. He would watch soccer on TV, and he always dreamed that he wanted to professionally play. And unfortunately, one day when he was walking home from school, he got caught in a crossfire from one of the bombings that was happening in Baghdad.
I was walking home from school. I ended up in the crossfire, and there was a bomb right next to my right foot, exploded, and that made me lose my right arm and my sight. I basically see nothing, no light or any shadows or anything. I lost the hope and the dream to play soccer again. Blind soccer, I heard about it through the Blind Association of Blind Athletes. I reached out to the director. He introduced me to a couple of coaches here in New York and around the country. I never thought that I'll be able to play soccer again. It really can't get better than this. And to be part of the Paralympics and to represent New York and represent this country, that's something I'm grateful for.
just shared that like after that he lost that hope to play soccer again until he kind of heard about this association that kind of serves blind athletes. But the way he came here is through it's actually really cool that the organization was founded on Staten Island by a Staten Islander. Her name is Elisa Montanti. When she heard about Ahmed's story, she reached out to the families. She just was like, I'm gonna bring him here. I'm gonna make sure he gets surgery for his arm. She said that she took him to 20 doctors because they just couldn't find out what happened to his eyes. And after that, she's like, I just never gave up on him. I needed to make sure, like, we knew what was going on. She told me during that time, like, he was only 7. So then he would go back home with his family, and then he came back again. And she had a piano in the house where she keeps all the children that she's helping through this organization. And she heard him just on the keyboard one day, and he was playing. She said it was golden, like what she heard. And she's also been in love with music her whole life. And she was just like, it spoke to me. And since then, she was like, I couldn't let him go back. But I also knew I had to ask his mom. And when she asked the mom, I guess, obviously wanted him to have a better life. Yeah. So she was like, yeah, you can keep him here, educate him, and, you know, have him live with you. And now Ahmed lives on the basement independently with Elisa. They have coffee together every morning. They're in a band together. Aww. They've created this bond, and they're in this community of people. And now when other people come to this organization to get surgeries and stuff, like other children that are victims of war or like natural disasters, he actually plays soccer with them, or he teaches them how to play on the keyboard. So it's like a full circle thing.
Yeah, absolutely. And it doesn't surprise me that he is kind of invested in building this thing up and helping out however he can, because he's had people helping him along the way, right? And I'm sure that that's so important to him. We'll be right back. The Mayor of Maple Avenue is a powerful multi-part podcast about Sean Sinisi, a victim of former Penn State football coach Jerry Sandusky, who was arrested 10 years ago for numerous child sexual abuse charges. The podcast series is written and hosted by Pulitzer Prize-winning reporter Sarah Ganim, who takes listeners into the world of addiction rehabilitation, where society can be quick to celebrate the consequences for abusers while not addressing the needs of their victims. Subscribe now to The Mayor of Maple Avenue wherever you get your podcasts. Let's move on to the second story I wanted to discuss today, which focuses on Ethan and Cole Corrigano, 2 Staten Island brothers who have refused to let their rare genetic condition stop them from pursuing their dreams as aspiring artists. You know, like the last story, I'm just kind of curious how you first heard about this and what made you want to do a feature on these 2.
Just like the last story, I heard about this through an email. I had someone from the Canvas Institute email me saying, these are 2 brothers. They're going to throw on a show at the Canvas Institute, and they're going to perform. One is going to perform comedy. The other is going to perform a musical performance. And what's interesting about them is that they have Wolfram syndrome. And despite that, they're still doing all these amazing things. And I remember sending that to Cassie and saying, like, wow, like, I definitely want to go cover this as well, because I've been doing similar stories.
This kind of work,
yeah. And it's like, it keeps falling on my lap. It must mean something, you know? Yeah. So I went to the show. I was stunned at how great, and it was their first show that they put together. Just, they put on just a really good show. Like, they brought on other local Staten Islanders that wanted to perform, and then they closed the show out with Cole singing and playing the piano, and Ethan doing his stand-up comedy. And it was such a good thing to be a part of. And I made sure I took my camera with me that day. And I was like, actually, yeah, I'm gonna reach out to them and interview them at their house and go dig a little deeper behind what this show is, behind who they are and what their story is. And that's exactly what I did. And I thought, like, just like the other story, there's so many layers to it.
Wolfram syndrome, for the listeners who don't know, is this rare genetic condition which causes them to be legally blind, hearing impaired, diabetic, and among a few other symptoms as well. But so in speaking with the brothers, I'm curious kind of what they told you about how that impacts their day-to-day lives and even their artistic pursuits. I know that the one who was doing stand-up was even joking about it at points, right? Yeah. So I'm curious kind of what they had to say about their condition.
Some of it is psychological and other parts are just very, not being able to hear and not being able to see. I remember Ethan, just seeing him on stage and how alive he comes and how he's just joking about this thing and how it affects his day-to-day life and what it is like to date as a legally blind person, what it is like to, commute, and just how hilarious all of it was.
When I'm walking around in public, people that don't know I can't see good, they just think I'm high. There's a lot of similarities. The phone and lights always bother my eyes, so my eyes are always red. I'm always walking around I have no idea where the hell I'm going because I don't.
When I'm on stage, I just talk about my life and my struggles. My goal is I'd love to travel the world and perform on large stages. I want to break into the business of TV and movies. I want to write my own television show about my life.
And then when I actually sat down with him and talked to him about it, it was so different. Who he is on stage and how confident he is and how much he laughs about his life. And then when I'm sitting with him, he was a bit nervous. He got more vulnerable and he was just like, sometimes I suffer from depression and it's really hard for me to write jokes and I get bad headaches and all I want to do is sleep and I don't want to do anything and I'm not feeling motivated. And being able to see that dichotomy made me realize who he is on stage is this person he's created, and he's so ambitious about being this comedian, and it's something that comes alive because he's so hardworking and he spends hours doing this despite sometimes not being able to. And the way it affects him is, I guess, he says, it affects him mentally, spiritually, sometimes energetically. He doesn't have any, will to do certain things. He just wants to sleep. But he says that he's so happy that he has this Wolfram syndrome because he's like, it gives me something to talk about on stage. It makes me just share it with other people and they're laughing. And he's like, what else could I ask for? And then when it comes to Cole is much more introverted. And when he's on stage, he was playing his piano. And when Ethan went up, everybody's laughing because he's cracking jokes, punchline after punchline. It's such a loud, lively room. And then when Cole went up, the room went silent and you could hear a pin drop and everyone's attention and eyes, they're so present. They're just listening to Cole's melodies and what he's singing about, the songs he writes. And one of his songs is, Can Anyone Hear Me? He's like, I'm not just this number, this statistic with where 1 in a million people have Wolfram syndrome. I'm this person, and brings it out in his songs how much he wants to feel seen. And because of that, he's a psychology major right now, and he wants to help other people that have disabilities like him. And he's very grateful that everyone's helped him growing up with, having to just grow up with it. And now he's like, I want to do that for other people, especially with people with disabilities, because they know I'll understand because I go through it as well. So
right.
So it affects them both, but I think it also has kind of made them go towards what they want and put real drive and passion behind it.
It affects you basically in every single way possible. In a weird way, this disease actually helped me for looking at life, I would say. I try to still just make the best out of it and pretty much do all I could because I guess that's all I could really do is just work with what I do have instead of focusing on what I don't have.
It seems like it's almost driven them even further in their pursuits of their goals and to be able to do those types of things in spite of it. And, it really is just very inspiring. So, but before we go, I wanted to talk to you a little bit about what it was like kind of conducting the interviews for this story and being able to hear from these residents, because it's so inspiring sometimes to hear some of these stories, things that we might take for granted necessarily. So I'm curious just kind of what stood out to you during the interviews from any of them.
I think one common theme between Ahmed, Cole, and Ethan is that they tell me they're so blessed and grateful. It doesn't matter that Ahmed can't see, doesn't have a right arm, doesn't matter that Ethan and Cole are legally blind and can barely hear. They are so grateful for what they have, and they don't want to focus on what they lack, as they say. They want to focus on what comes after that and the things that they do have. So I think seeing that, just how grateful they are, and puts things into perspectives. And it's like, why would anyone complain when there's so much to be grateful for? And I think one also really cool thing I learned while doing Ahmed's story was really what it means to be a journalist. I remember I told Cassie, I want to make this into a video piece. And then Jason, one of our colleagues, he was like, let's, put a GoPro camera around his head. And while he's running and shooting a goal, we'll get that on camera. But we also can show like what he sees versus what other people see. And I think being able to really visually show that made me realize like it's actually about giving justice to the stories you're telling and literally putting everything you have into it, whether it's doing a GoPro camera or even a drone footage. And it makes you realize that's what journalism is about. It's like constantly trying to find creative ways to fully tell the story authentically, so that it just gives Ahmed full justice to what he goes through.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, thank you so much for joining me today, Priya. It was great having you on. If any of our listeners have not checked out these stories yet, I would highly recommend that they do. And so just keep up the great work, and I'm sure I'll have you on again soon.
Thank you so much. It was great being here.
You're welcome. Thank you for listening to the Staten Island Advances from the Scene. If you like what you've heard, please make sure to rate and subscribe wherever you get your podcasts, and visit SILive.com for the latest on all these stories and more. Thank you for supporting local journalism.